Listening through the story provided here, you will participate in the Civil War as a member of Minnesota's Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Pay attention to the cues and select options that will advance you through the story as you take part in a major event in Minnesota's history. The year is 1861. Your family has recently settled Minnesota, which had just become a state 3 years ago. Your family chose to settle this new state for multiple reasons. Having come to America from Scandinavia, they are familiar and comfortable with the climate and agriculture of the area, and are adept farmers. Knowing nearly 25% of this new state was Scandinavian, German, or Irish descent, your family knew that they would be living among others with similar cultures and beliefs. Your family also had strong abolitionist beliefs, and learning that Minnesota's constitution banned slavery made the state that much more appealing. Your family chooses to start their new farm in Brown County, near the city of New Ulm. One morning, while visiting town, you decide to purchase a newspaper. Did you choose to avoid the Army because you're too young? Age wasn't exactly a crucial number in allowing citizens to join the Army. 100,000 soldiers of the Civil War were under the legal age of 18. Some of them were even as young as 9 years old, enlisting as musicians. Maybe you chose to avoid the Army because you're not male. That also wasn't a strictly enforced rule. As many as 400 women were known to have hid their gender in order to participate in the war. Congratulations on your choice to join the Minnesota Union Army in the Civil War. You are among the more than 20,000 Minnesotans who have volunteered to enlist for a 3-year term. Upon enlisting, you are assigned to Fort Ridgely. There, you are issued a haversack, a somewhat waterproof bag that will be used to carry your rations and personal belongings. Move your belongings into the haversack to continue. While preparing for the war, you talk to your fellow soldiers who tell you about how Minnesota came to be. They tell you of the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux and the Treaty of Mendota, both of which were signed in 1851 that purchased land from the Dakota people for about 12 cents per acre. This treaty caused 7,000 of them to move into reservations bordering the Minnesota River. In 1858, the entire northern half of the reservation was purchased from the Dakota tribe. Your fellow soldiers tell you that all of this land is being paid for with annuity payments. On August 18th, you notice a group of refugees who are racing towards the fort. You confront them as they tell you that because the Dakota people were getting angry about annuity payments that were not being made, a small group of them had just attacked and killed 5 people, and they're concerned that this is only the beginning. You rush off to bring this news to your commanding officer, Captain John S. Marsh. Marsh acts quickly and gets the troops of Company B ready to respond. Will you join your company in this fight? The next morning on August 18th, Marsh takes your group of 47 enlisted men towards the Lower Sioux Agency. At noon, you stop at the Minnesota River for water, but here you get attacked by Dakota warriors. Catching your company off guard, they kill 24 of your fellow soldiers, wounding 5 others. Upon retreat, Marsh leads the remaining members of your company in an attempt to swim across the Minnesota River. Will you follow? Having seen that the river current is far too strong, you choose a different path from the captain for your retreat. This turns out to be a good choice, as the captain drowns in his attempt to swim across the river. You arrive back at the fort with the remaining members of Company B a couple of days later, and learn that on the same day of your battle, an attack had been made on your home city of New Ulm. This was a rather small attack, composed of only about 100 Dakota people, and they're expecting a much larger attack soon on the same city. You are concerned about your family who's still in New Ulm, and you talk to a friend about trying to go to New Ulm and help to defend it. But he tells you that would be suicide, as you don't stand a chance of traveling that far by yourself in a time of war. Ignoring your friend's warnings, you sneak away from the fort and start traveling back towards New Ulm to help protect your family. This was a very bad choice, as you're ambushed after only about 20 minutes and killed by some Dakota warriors. Making the wise decision, you await for news in New Ulm with your company back in Fort Ridgely. On the evening of August 24, news comes to the fort about the battle. You learn that Charles Flandreau took command of a group of hastily organized militia units, composed of men who lived in the area, to defend the city. Barricades were erected around the city, while the women and children were packed into brick buildings for protection. The attack had arrived on the morning of August 23rd, with Lieutenant William Huey leading the counterattack, followed by 75 men outside the city, while Flandreau led 250 men to defend from behind the barricades. Huey's counterattack had been unsuccessful, and his troops were blocked from returning to New Ulm to help with the defense efforts. 650 Dakota warriors attacked the city from all directions, while Flandreau commanded two groups of civilian militiamen to divide west and northwest of the barricades to hold them back. But the Dakota warriors, attacking from horseback, are able to fan out and deliver fatal blows to many of these men, and force them to retreat back towards the barricades. They were able to act strategically and hold off the Dakota warriors long enough for a victory. However, 34 soldiers died defending the city and 60 others received serious wounds. On August 25th, the 2,000 survivors of the battle at New Ulm were planning to head to Mankato for refuge. You learn that your entire family, with the exception of your father who died in the battle, is among them. Much bloodshed has occurred over the past couple of weeks, and bodies need to be buried. Hearing that Major Joseph R. Brown is planning to head back towards the Lower Sioux Agency for burials, you volunteer to leave Company B to assist with the efforts. After your party buries 54 bodies by the first day of September, they set up camp in Birch Coulee for the night. The next morning, you wake up in the middle of an ambush. Dakota warriors are attacking the camp from every side. Within a few minutes, 30 of your fellow soldiers are wounded, and most of your cavalry's horses are dead. Colonel Sibley sends you reinforcements when he learns of the attacks, and the battle lasts for 31 hours. By the end, 24 men are killed and another 60 are wounded. Exhausted, you feel lucky to be one of the few who got away with minor injuries. You return to Fort Ridgely once again, where you learn that Governor Alexander Ramsey is formulating a plan against the Dakota tribe in response to their recent attacks. He had already deployed Colonel Henry Hastings Sibley to negotiate a settlement with Chief Little Crow, the leader of the Dakota people. While attempting to negotiate the release of the Minnesotans who were being held prisoner, Sibley refused to give in to Little Crow's demands and insisted that the Dakota people surrender. When they refused to surrender, Sibley returned to St. Peter and immediately deployed troops for another battle. He led 1,400 troops to Fort Ridgely, where they awaited resupply of guns, ammunition, and horses to mount the attack. While waiting at Fort Ridgely, Colonel Sibley learns how you survived recent battles, and asks for you to join his force in the impending encounter. You are still sore from the previous battles, but you know that your experience and skills will be very useful in this fight. Many of your fellow soldiers are also hurt, but they still want to do what they can to assist in this upcoming fight. You know that they will need every soldier that they can get, and that your friends will be very disappointed in you if you don't participate in this cause. On September 19th, Colonel Sibley determines that enough supplies have arrived for the battle to commence, and he leads the troops up the Minnesota River. The troops consisted of the 3rd Minnesota Infantry, the 6th Minnesota Infantry, and the 7th Minnesota Infantry regiments. That night, Sibley commanded the troops to set up camp near what he thought was Wood Lake, but what was actually a lake about 3.5 miles east of that, named Lone Tree Lake. Early the next morning, you join the 3rd Minnesota Regiment in a search for food. All of a sudden, a band of Dakota warriors jumps out of the grass to ambush your group. This started the Battle of Wood Lake, and the battle ended after 2 hours of fighting, in which Chief Mankato was killed by a cannonball. This battle was considered a large victory, acting as the final battle between Minnesota and the Dakota people. While the Dakota warriors were at the Battle of Wood Lake, a peace party of friendly Dakota people had grouped with Christian leaders to release the Minnesotans who were being held captive. After the battle, Little Crow told his warriors to flee west and northwest, and the peace party then turned the captives over to Sibley. On September 26th, you join Colonel Sibley in efforts to take 1,200 Dakota people into custody to be held accountable for the attacks that their tribe made on Minnesota troops and civilians. 2 days later, on September 28th, Sibley appoints your commanding officer as one of the military commissioners ordered to try summarily the captured Dakota people for these crimes, who asks you to help him make his ruling. For those whom he tries, what verdict do you think he should give? Your ruling proves to be a popular one. Of the 393 Dakota who received trials in the next couple of months, 323 of them were ruled guilty, and 303 of those were sentenced to be hanged. However, President Lincoln and his team of lawyers decide this is too harsh, and they rule that only those with clear evidence of murder or rape be executed. And on December 6th, he orders that the executions be reduced to 39 of those found guilty. Subsequently, many of those whom you sentenced to death will be allowed to live. By December 26th, one more of the men sentenced to death is pardoned, and the remaining executions take place. In all, 38 Dakota people are hanged in Mankato. Your compassion for these men is not shared. Of the 393 Dakota who received trials in the next couple of months, 323 of them were ruled guilty, and 303 of those were sentenced to be hanged. However, President Lincoln and his team of lawyers decide that this is too harsh, and they rule that only those with clear evidence of murder or rape be executed. And on December 6th, he orders that the executions be reduced to 39 of those found guilty. Subsequently, many of those whom were found guilty and sentenced to death will be allowed to live. By December 26th, one more of the men who was sentenced to death is pardoned, and the remaining executions take place. In all, 38 Dakota people are hanged in Mankato. Coupled with the estimated 600 civilian deaths, the hanging of these 38 people of the Dakota tribe remains today as the single largest mass execution in American history.